So The Science of Storytelling is a book by Will Storr. It sort of delves into different aspects of storytelling, such as the structure itself, and it takes examples from the likes of Pixar, a lot of other writers and directors and aspects of how they actually structure their stories, and has a lot of different examples from different novels and films. And then it also looks into like understanding storytelling, sort of where it's come from, the psychology elements, which ties into the whole science behind it, and linking with the title of the book, and then how it plays such an important role in our lives, because stories sort of it's been around for a very long time. It sort of interlinks with us, and one of the reasons why I think story is really powerful is because it ties into our own lives, because our day-to-day lives, our entire lives are laid out and are a story. You know, we will face challenges, we're going to change as people, and in essence that's why I think that we tie into great stories, because there's aspects of it that link into our own lives in some shape or form. And I guess just to start with the basics, so what is storytelling? I guess the Matthew Kennedy basic definition is telling a story. I know it sounds utterly ridiculous. I mean, it's honestly like what is a ham sandwich? It's a sandwich with ham in it. I mean, they're not exactly the same thing, but I think in its simplest form, that's what storytelling is. And I think the main thing to look into is, well, what is story? And I guess one of the things that stuck with me, at least within this book, one of the first things is trying to understand not just the importance of story, but trying to understand really what it is. And I think that's always important when you're looking into new topics, trying to gain new skills and experiences. That topic, just trying to understand the basics first, get your head wrapped around it before sort of delving deeper and deeper and applying it to either your own work, content, writing, whatever it may be. And it's, for me, one of the takeaways I got was story is about something changing, and in most cases it's the character itself changing from who they are at the start of the book, who you're introduced to, and then it introduces you to maybe challenges they may face, and the story is the progression and how they change to adapt to the scenario they're thrown into, or that sort of world that they're trying to either counter something from there. So I mean, just to take one example from that, if we look at Star Wars, and let's just take episode 4, it's probably one of the better ones. You take Luke Skywalker, you try to break down the story in its simplest form. It is just about Luke changing from the start to the finish. So he starts off as a young little farmer boy, and then he encounters a problem which ends up being the Empire, and it's how he changes to adapt to that, and then he ends up going from one person to almost being more of a hero, saving the princess, saving the galaxy. And in its simplest form, it is a story of change. And I think that's just one of the key things I've taken away, just to focus on, if you're writing anything or creating any videos or maybe even a short film, short story, and I mean, yeah, even any type of content, it is just trying to think about, well, how is the person changing? And even in a business sense, you take any sort of B2B or business or brand content. I mean, you look at an article or any content you're trying to do, try to maybe think of, from your customer's point of view, who are they now? And then when meeting your business, how are they going to change? So you can tie it into different aspects. It doesn't just have to be if you're writing a book, maybe even planning to create a short film or be involved in something creative like that. You can tie these storytelling lessons into so many other different walks of life, which I think is really interesting. And the next key sort of thing I've taken away from it is actually looking into the different structures of story. I think we'll all be familiar, I guess, from back in our school days, of the very basic story structure where you have your beginning, your middle, and your end. But what's great about this book is it delves into that a lot deeper. I know a few books I've read previously, Donald Miller's Building a Story Brand. He looks into another storytelling framework, and then this covers several others. So I know in this book, one of the main ones it looks at is the Pixar framework. So it's structured very similar to what I mentioned before, beginning, middle, and end, but they break it down in a more specific way in how they structure all their films. So it's one worth trying to understand when you're actually maybe watching some of their films, seeing how they're taking that structure and applying it in all their different films. And is there a way you can take anything from all these different story structures and apply it through? So theirs is starts with once upon a time, then every day, one day, then because of that, and then because of that, and it ends with until finally. So that's the very, very basic structure of how they use the story framework when they're creating Pixar films. I guess when you're starting out, and especially for me, it's just trying to understand how different people and different frameworks they are. And I guess with the Pixar one, it links fairly closely to the hero journey. And then you have others like the 3-act structure, which is, I guess, a tiny bit more of a detailed one on your start, beginning, your middle and end. And then you have likes of Dan Harmon's story circle. So there's plenty of other ones out there. I probably won't go into detail, at least in this video, around story structure itself. But I do think they cover it in a decent basic aspect, and it is something I'm going to be looking into in more detail, trying to apply it to videos, trying to apply it to writing. So if you do want to know more, a little bit more, and dive in together around further understanding story structure and different structures, how we can apply it to our own writing, our own work, let me know, and I'll definitely dive into it in another video. But going into the next point, and probably one of my other key takeaways from the book, was understanding the basics. So there was a chapter in the book when he talks about what story means to different people. So there might be certain people from a certain walk of life who may, I guess, align with a specific author, director, their style, just based on like the life they've lived. So maybe you're like, I don't know, for an example, you're a working middle class male, and then you might like align more towards those type of authors because their story and their life is similar to your story. And then ultimately, when they're creating, either if it's a book, if it's a film, whatever that content might be, it'll usually stem from the experiences they've had in life, because how they lived and how they experienced things shapes their stories. Because another example tied in with that, you look at the likes of Star Wars again. I mean, I'm going to probably keep using this as an example, but you look at George Lucas when he was filming the first sort of series of Star Wars films. It took a lot of influence from old samurai mythology, and I guess related to films like that, old westerns, and then it sort of ties in. You can tell it sort of bleeds through into his story. He's not just copying a western, he's not just copying a samurai film, but there are things that he's enjoyed and has an impact on his life that he then applies to his work. I mean, even take Han Solo for an example. He basically is a space cowboy type of character, and I mean, if you look at him, he's basically like a reincarnation or space version of like Clint Eastwood. So he's obviously had a huge influence from that, but even with that, still an incredibly unique character, and it's still a unique story. Even though it takes that hero journey approach and he's had inspiration from other things, it's still unique because it takes from himself and his own experience in the world and his own views and opinions. So he has the story in his mind of how it's going to go. And that's why I think it makes it so unique, because no one can tell sort of your stories and the stories you want to tell exactly like you. And that's what makes each story unique. So it's just how different people can sort of align with other people. So I guess to like summarize that little section a little bit better, instead of babbling on, it's more like just trying to be yourself in your writings. So I guess when starting out is just to experience life a bit more. I've seen it from like breakthrough authors and writers that they come further down the line in their lives, maybe in like their 50s or their 60s, and I think what works well for them is they've actually lived a lot more, so they can sort of put that through into their stories, their novels, etc., and it works so much better. So it's just maybe about maybe not trying to reach everyone with what you're doing, whether it's a book, whether it's film, whether it's a type of content, even if it's like in the marketing space, but just focusing in on that audience that has similar beliefs to you and a similar group or community as yourself, and then you'll connect with them better, because there's likely that you'll have crossover, yeah, and not each and one person have lived the exact same lives, but they're more than likely to connect more with you and have similar-ish views and connect with the stories you tell. If there's a sort of similar people from a similar area and background and maybe similar interests than yourself. So it's just about looking at your own what your audience is and trying to just focus on being genuine and true to yourself, really. So good to summarize it up at the very end. I mean, I'll link this back to the beginning. Is it worth reading? I think yes. But before you would go ahead to read it, I just highly recommend going on YouTube, searching for his Will Storr. If you type in Will Storr, it'll be one of the first like TED Talks, and it's around storytelling, the science of storytelling. So link with the title of the book. I personally would watch that first. It's only about, I think about it like a 14 or so minute video, and it pretty much summarizes some of the core things within this book itself. So I would watch it first. If it's something that really, really intrigues you, something you're really interested in, you want to know more about, I definitely would then recommend getting the book. But if it is something that you feel like you've already got what you need from that video, then I'd probably consider leaving it, to be honest. So for the specific people I think it has the most value for would be the likes of if you're a writer, any sort of videographer, in a marketing background, I guess, that relates to any sort of content. So like if you're in like a social media manager role, if you create any sort of content, and even just generically if you're a content creator, I think this is a really interesting book, and it sort of is the start of if you want to really begin to understand what storytelling is. And I think there's some important structures, frameworks and lessons that can just help take your content and what you're producing into a different level, and obviously help connect then with your audience in a much more intimate and effective way. I mean, for me, I'm going to be reading it again later in the year. It's not like a life-changing book to me, at least at this stage, but I think from at least the couple of key lessons I've got from it, it's already pushing me down another learning curve to understand more about story structure, which I think is incredibly valuable. So if that aspect you want to know more about, let me know in the comments below. I'll be planning to do a video about it in the next couple of months. It might take a bit of time to read more up on it, get more ideas, maybe read a few more books around the actual structure of it. But it's definitely one I want to dive into a bit deeper and share in the future. But again, I'll link the video for his TED Talk below. So if it is something you're on the fence about, it's definitely worth watching that one first. And then hopefully you enjoyed this video, and let me know as well if you've actually read the book and what you think of it. Anyway, see you in the next one. Bye.